You're listening to the Write Project podcast and radio program, a show about writing and modern Newfoundland author culture. This program is produced and recorded at CHMR FM 93.5 FM in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, and is aired on other great stations in the province and elsewhere in the country. It can also be heard online at www.chmr.ca. I'm your host, Matthew LeDrew. Welcome to a very special episode of the Write Project podcast. Today, we've got a host of authors on to answer one of the most frequent questions that's asked of any author. We're asking them, what are the most important magazines for writers to subscribe to? And today to answer, we have on Chelsea B., author of London Calling and Christmas Mornings.
I've never really subscribed to magazines. I have very few mailing lists. But I think that within the past 3 or 4 years, the writing community on YouTube has been fantastic. And
on YouTube?
It's been growing rapidly. And there are, take every piece of advice you get from anywhere with a grain of salt. But there's people sharing first of all, their own personal experiences with traditional publishing and self-publishing. So you get to see it from their eyes, as well as just general writing advice and walking people through how they outline, how they do all these different things. And I think that it's really good. And it's obviously, it's YouTube. So it's 10 minutes or less, normally 5 to 8 minute videos.
Fair.
So they're very manageable amount of advice. So I think that that's a good starting point.
I really like the videos on YouTube. I learn a lot through example. So they'll break down an existing, very popular book that everyone's read, or they'll break down a movie more often than not and kind of show you what they did to write it this way in the movie and the tricks they pulled to elicit this emotional response.
Yes.
And in learning through example like that, I tend to go oh, okay, I can emulate that.
Yeah. I've been watching Jenna Moreci for a couple of years, and it was good as a viewer to see her go from, I'm writing a novel, to now her second novel is about to be self-published. And she goes through her whole process of why she chose self-publishing versus traditional publishing, pros and cons of each, just very educational and unbiased. And then obviously how to write a scene. What is a scene? How to write dialogue.
What is dialogue?
Dialogue is speaking.
I know, but you said how to write a scene. What is a scene? How to write dialogue. And I was like, what is dialogue? Yeah. And,
tropes and different things. And so it's really good to see just someone who is, and she studied marketing in school, so she has a lot of videos on marketing books, because I really liked her, her walkthrough of how she chose, to do what she did. And she said, I already knew that I could write, so I didn't want to go to school for writing, but I wanted to know how to make money off of it.
Sure.
So I went to school for marketing.
Yeah, that's fair. Thank you very much. Next up, we have the author of Alligator and February, Lisa Moore. Lisa Moore, what are the most important magazines for writers to subscribe to?
Well, the magazines that were important to me when I was starting out, and I think are still very important, are the literary journals all across Canada. That's where I began to send my work. The Malahat Review, Prism International, Room, Grain, the New Quarterly, and of course, Riddle Fence is the Newfoundland Literary Journal. Also, the Newfoundland Quarterly, Newfoundland Studies, but also the Walrus, the New Yorker. The New Yorker has an incredible short story podcast, 2 actually, and a beautiful poetry podcast, and those things are free, and you can just listen to the stories, sometimes being read by the authors, sometimes being discussed by the editor of the New Yorker, Deborah Treisman, with another author who has chosen to read somebody else's story. So I think those are the places that, now of course I've left out some of the most important. Tattle Creek is a really great magazine. Are those the magazines everybody says, or have you got a whole other slew?
Oh, there's a whole bunch, but Riddle Fence is on most people's list, which I'm really happy about. That one's on mine too. It's a great magazine. Yeah, that's pretty fair. It's shockingly, like, a lot of the younger authors we have on can't name any, and it's all podcasts and mailing lists and stuff like that, which is interesting. I'm not gonna say it's a bad thing, but there's something to be said for, like, those magazines. You also, sometimes your first gig might be writing something for a lit magazine. So it's not that I think the information's bad from a mailing list or something. It's that world going away might result in a limit of paid opportunities, or a limiting of paid opportunities for authors, which wouldn't be great.
Also, I think, I was talking about communities earlier, and I think a very interesting community grows up around a literary magazine. So, if you, for instance, send your stories to the Malahat Review, which is in British Columbia, and when I was beginning writing, I would send stories there, pretty regularly, and they were rejected pretty regularly. But when, in fact, for a very long time, but when they finally did take a story, by that time I had been reading all the authors that they were publishing. And when I went to BC, I met a lot of them. So I knew their work over, say, the course of 5 years. And that created a community. And the same with all those other journals. Like, a community forms around the journals and their editors, and the editors are usually writers as well. And little by little, you get to know sort of if you're writing fiction, the fiction landscape of a small piece of it in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. Next on the line, we have John Dobbin, best-selling author of The Starving. John, do you have any favorite literary journals or literary publications, like those ones where there's, books, short stories every month, or lit journals, or maybe even books about writing or whatever?
I don't follow any literary journals right now, although I do follow Three Crows magazine on Twitter, and they're hilarious, and I really like those guys. I haven't really read a lot of the stuff they put in there, but their online presence is great, and I think they're a good bunch. But what I do really like to read is like writing advice from other writers, and I've signed up for a couple of newsletters. One from Delia S. Dawson, who writes a bunch of different Star Wars books, and she writes under the pen name Lila S. Bowen for some YA books. And she writes some really great, like 10 things is what she calls it. She used to only write it on Twitter, now she puts it in her newsletter, where it's just like a list of 10 things you should do when you're writing certain things, or how to approach writing certain things. And they're really great, really informative, and really supportive of writers and agents and all that kind of stuff.
Thank you very much. Next on the line, we have Nicole Little. Nicole Little is an acclaimed short story author who has been featured in more than a half dozen titles just in the last year. She has been featured in Kitsora, the autobiography, best-selling Dystopia from the Rock, Flights from the Rock, Monsters, Beyond, and Apocalypse, Eerie Christmas, Love, and Bad Romance. It's just a plethora of short story material. Currently, she is working on the Lotus Fountain, which is going to be one of the books included in, or novellas included in, a big project from Engine Books that we can talk about now called Slipstreamers. Nicole Little, what are some important magazines?
Well, the ones that I've subscribed to are mostly like horror related, fantasy related, like that sort of thing. I get a lot of stuff coming from Black Hair Press. Flame Tree is another one. I want to say, I think it's The Anarchist is another one. They do short stories.
Okay.
I follow a lot of people on Twitter that sort of, I know it's not the same thing, but they...
That's kind of the new version of it, though.
Yeah,
like that question with the writers' magazines, I'm like, oh, you. Like, I mean, they still exist, but I'm like, oh, you. Yeah,
like, I get a lot of, like, email ones come, like, a lot of they have stuff in like stories and like submissions that are opened up and stuff like that. And of course, I get the Engine Fantasy one coming to my inbox as well.
Yay.
But I follow a lot of publishers, and like Rhonda Parrish is a really great source on Twitter as well. She does a lot of anthologies and stuff, so I find her really good. But yeah, it's mostly I mostly stick to like Twitter and like newsletters and stuff that pop up into my inbox and things like that.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Next on the line, we have author Shannon Green. Shannon Green is a gifted author with a talent for the strange and has been recognized in both the genre community and the contemporary literary community for his pursuits. In the past, he has been shortlisted for the 1996 Arts and Letters Award and has as well won the 2015 Audience Choice Steampunk Newfoundland Showcase. Green has received praise for his stories The Wine Dark Sea in Chillers from the Rock, as well as his stories in Fantasy from the Rock, Dystopia from the Rock, The Hamthology, and the just-released Flights from the Rock. Thank you for joining us, Shannon. What are the most important magazines for writers to subscribe to?
Not that I can think of. I don't subscribe to any of these mail-out lists. I find having a good writing group who will critically look at your work and suggest, oh, well, such and such a publication is looking for submissions. I find that's great. But as far as professional networking in writing, I have done none.
Okay.
So
That's fair. Says the person who was, I think, shortlisted for Arts and Letters.
yes,
Yeah.
that was just, I saw they had an opening and sent in a piece. I was under consideration to work with Ed Greenwood, and that was just a right place, right time. My stories in Engine and other anthologies have just been, I randomly saw an ad somewhere, or a friend said, oh, hey, this is happening. I think you've got a story that could go in it, or I think you could write something fun for it. I've just relied on word of mouth and right place, right time for everything I have published. I've been very lucky that way.
That is, that's incredible. But yeah, okay, cool. Thank you very much. Next on the line, we have Matthew Daniels, frequent contributor to the From the Rock series, as well as the author of the upcoming novel Diary of Knives. Matthew Daniels, what are important magazines or mailing lists or blogs that you think, podcasts that you think writers should subscribe to? Should they subscribe, as you always say?
A lot of it will be regional stuff. So when I was in British Columbia a few years ago, they have the Shoe Swap Writers Association. So if you're in British Columbia, especially if you're in the Okanagan Valley area, it's great to join up with them, because these kinds of organizations, much like the Writers Alliance of Newfoundland and Labrador, it gives you, not only do these organizations provide you with newsletters of new opportunities that are coming up, calls for writers in residence, writing competitions, and the sort of thing, like news and all of that, but it also gives you an obvious framework for getting involved in a community. You get to meet other writers. You get to talk about the issues. You get to look at various ways of setting up feedback frameworks and that sort of thing. So wherever you're living, any country in the world, the majority of them, either by province or state or what have you, even by community, will have a group or organization like that, and I think it's a really good opportunity to sign up with those groups, especially if you're relatively new, and if you've been around for a long while. Because if you're an established writer, you've got several books under your belt and awards and whatnot, you can share what you've learned, and you have the opportunity to pass that on and build your credibility by showing that you are somebody who knows stuff, and which is always great, right? And if you're new, then obviously it's a great opportunity to make those connections, find out about who the editors are, hear the horror stories about the unethical practices, and so on. and they're really great for the warnings. They're great for the opportunities. They're great for the connections. That kind of stuff is awesome. As for magazines and the like, I'm less familiar with those, but in science fiction and fantasy, which are more my kind of circle,
Yeah.
I tend to look for the ones like Clark's World and Asimov's and this sort of thing, the big ones that have sort of international appeal, a large readership, and they tend to be either paraprofessional or semi-professional, whatever term you prefer to use, and up there with the professional pay rates for selling short stories and the like. So it's one of those things where if you roll up your sleeves and you get in there, you can find reams and reams of lists of magazines and subscription opportunities based on genre or region or various other divisions that can be awesome opportunities, not only for finding material that will be interesting and exciting to you, like reading new stories such as Slipstream or Weird that you might not have heard about before, or different takes on science fiction or fantasy that are not just necessarily the blowing stuff up with spaceships or fighting dragons with a magic sword. There's a lot more range and niche and depth and nuance out there based on usually coming from these particular focused magazines, websites, groups, and what have you. So if you're new, or even if you've been around for a while and you don't really have a lot of that connectivity, I think it's a really great thing to get out there, subscribe to a few things that share your interests, or that are good platforms to get your stuff out there, as well as being something that you want to support, that you're excited about. If you're really into noir, there are noir magazines out there, that sort of thing. It's great on a lot of fronts.
Wow. Okay. Excellent. Great answer.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Next up, we have B.C. Laybolt, the Canadian independent author of the 10th Lunan Regiment series, a military sci-fi saga. He also writes an immersive dark fantasy series. His current titles include To Drown in Sand, Juris Lunans, To Drown in Ash, The Dog, Bone, and Upon a Wake of Flame. B.C. Laybolt, what are the most important magazines for writers to subscribe to?
There's a couple of really great resources available. Back in the magazine days, I used to subscribe to Writer's Digest, which gave me a huge amount of input, and I tried to do everything in all the magazines all the time. The problem is you can't. You just can't. You can't do everything they're telling you to do. Yeah. And what was especially intriguing was in those days, in the back, were all these writer festivals, workshops, these teasings where it would try and get you to come to like a mystery festival in Boston. And you'd be like, oh my God, can you imagine? Because, Robert B. Parker will be there. And you get starstruck, and you start building these movies in your head of like how great things are going to be and how you could actually do this. I still have those. Like they're in my little writer library shelf upstairs in my attic. But for me, the most groundbreaking website that I could find was J.A. Conrath's site. Because he literally said, guys, I'm done. I'm not doing this traditional publishing thing anymore, and here's why. Here's the unboxing of the Big Five. Here is all the antitrust violations that they've done. Here is the corporation scheming that's going on. Here's how you'll never win, and here's why. And here's why you should use Amazon. And there's there's probably 300 to 400 blog entries that he's made where he puts his income out there. He opens himself to attack from like the industry standards. James Patterson hates his guts and is constantly, he ran a full page ad in the New York Times against him. And Conrath just holds his ground all the time. He's like, no, this is why we do this. This is what people need to know. To me, that was the number one motivator for me. And I check in with that site all the time because I can't believe somebody had the gumption to pull back the curtains on the publishing industry and say, you can do this. And even if it doesn't like turn into a birthday cake for you, it's worth knowing. So that and probably larger genre websites like IO9, Chris Hardwick's podcast is unbelievably inspiring, because you listen to people who did the work. They went through the process. They had a little tiny project, and they kept pushing with it, and they became Guillermo del Toro, or they became Rob Zombie, right?
Yeah.
Those are invaluable, especially when you get bogged down in your own head and think you should stop.
Okay, that's awesome. Thank you very much. Next on the line, we have JRH Lawless, author of the novel Always Greener. Jay, in your opinion, what are important magazines or mailing lists or podcasts that writers should be subscribing or listening to?
So many. I'll focus on things that are free, for starters.
Sure.
So podcast-wise, Writing Excuses is one that I absolutely love. That's Marie Robinette Kowal, Brandon Sanderson, just some brilliant people who are there, and also varying hosts, Dan Wells and Howard Taylor, just absolutely brilliant look at both the craft and the industry. They have agents on there regularly as well. They also do a cruise. I would love to do someday, but anyway, not at that stage. Yeah, so that's definitely one I would recommend. It's really nice and accessible as well. So if you are afraid, going to listen to a writer podcast, and maybe it'll be full of jargon, or it'll be full of things that you have to be a professional or part of the industry already to understand. It's not the case, and when there is anything technical or any expression, that sort of thing, they always explain it very, very well. So that's definitely what I would recommend. Everything on Writer's Digest is just full of resources. I had an article there about how I found my agent recently. But there's so much there to tap into. The big sort of online events, like I said, like Pitch Wars, definitely go, engage with that, even if you don't have a manuscript ready yet, but even just to be part of the, seeing what's there, part of the discussions, part of forums, that sort of thing is absolutely brilliant. That's, for somebody starting out who, doesn't already have professional sales and so on. Once you do get sales, that sort of thing, then definitely, by all means, if you're science fiction or fantasy writer, or horror as well, for that matter, definitely engage with professional organizations like SIFWA, which is also open to Canadians and people all over the world, even though it's science fiction fantasy writers of America, quote unquote. Other organizations, I'm a member of Codex Writers, brilliant organization as well, lots of support there. And also mentorship programs they do. I mentioned that I'm in the, I have mentored people, and you don't need to be at all a member of SIFWA or anything for that, within the SIFWA mentorship program. So I've just spent the last 3 months with 3 authors, including Canadian authors for that matter, who are at the beginning of their career, to give them orientation, if they're focused on short stories, if they were focused on novel length, to just really, help them as much as possible of all aspects of both craft and industry. So, there's a lot of support there. Don't hesitate to go get it.
Excellent. That's amazing. So some of that, especially Writing Excuses, is a common thread on that question. But yeah, that's all amazing stuff. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. Next on the line, we have Amanda Labonte, author of the Call of the Sea and Supernatural Causes series. Amanda Labonte, are there any important magazines, mailing lists, or anything like that writers should subscribe to?
Podcasts. I listen to podcasts. I mainly listen to that kind of information now, because I do sometimes still read books about writing, but and on craft and that kind of thing. But I'm a really big fan of listening to podcasts, because that gives me the information while I'm doing. I can do something else while I'm listening to it. I'm a big fan of The Creative Pen, which is
I don't think I've heard of that one.
Pen with 2 N's.
Oh.
It's Joanna Penn runs it, and she also runs a newsletter, so you can get on that as well. and she is awesome, and she covers a multitude of things because she's a nonfiction writer and speaker, and then and her nonfiction writing is about the craft of writing and the industry of writing, and then she's also a fiction writer. She writes crime thrillers with a like a religious overtone. I don't mean like spiritual. I mean like she has a background in like religious history, so that's her. So it's more like like a Dan Brown kind of genre, and then she also runs a podcast and just interviews lots of different writers. So she's big on like the industry, the craft, but also like the overall like mental health of writers. So you can listen to her, you can go back and look at her like backlog, and she has everything from like how to publish wide to how to manage your finances at various stages, like from like you're just entering the self-publishing market or you've just published your first traditional book to managing depression as a writer, and she's a good authority on a lot of things, but she always has really good guests too.
Oh wow, cool.
She's my fave. Yeah, cool. That way. And then if you just want like just on the writing craft, Writing Excuses, which is like 15 minutes and the weekly episodes, and it covers they've been out for like 15 seasons, and they've got a season on writing characters. So it could be like how to develop side characters, and the myth of only writing what you know, and how to write about something when you're not an expert on something, and just how to be sensible. And they're all really well established and really well known writers in their own right.
Writing what you know is it is a myth, but it's such a marketing ploy. I feel like it started like, well, this book's better because it's a book about an engineer, and it's written by a former engineer, so he knows.
Right?
I feel like it started as marketing.
You can never write fantasy because you don't live in a fantastical world. And it's like, well, you can, but like if it's more that you take something that you're familiar with and apply that to what you're interested in writing. So if you're a welder, then it would make all the sense in the world to write, a high fantasy, and one of your characters know a lot about something that you already know a lot about. It just makes the writing process easier and more authentic if you include the things you know. Yeah. But yeah, you don't have to only write about, if we all only wrote about our own lives, well, my stuff would be so very boring.
I mean, I feel like it would be better as don't write things that like have answers, but you're ignorant to the answers on, which isn't as pithy. But, like, when I was young, I wrote a courtroom drama that will never see print because I had no idea how a courtroom worked. And it's...
Well, and the other thing is, I actually did a podcast on that where they brought in a lawyer because they did a whole series of things writers get wrong.
Yeah.
And he said, like, he doesn't watch courtroom stuff because as a lawyer, it's really frustrating. But,
well, and some of it's just simple, like, you're not actually allowed to enter the well in real life. Like, you're not allowed to go into, at least in the American system, you're not allowed to go into that area where on TV they always step in and make this grand speech, like, and they walk around. You're not allowed to do that. The bailiff will tackle you.
Right, and you're, and you can't just, like, shout objection, and then, like, the judge shouts, like, sustained, or what, like, there's a whole process for doing things, and the less dramatic a trial is, like, the more realistic it is, and then that's really boring. So, like, courtroom dramas never really... John Grisham is a lawyer, and his courtroom dramas are still not authentic because he's also a writer. So he's choosing to write what he knows, but to also like leave certain things wrong because that's what will make it interesting to the reader.
But in fairness, like mine was very bad. Like I wrote a courtroom drama in which the lawyers would just switch sides depending on the evidence. Like, they'd just be like, I am now for the prosecution.
That's probably, like, a bit too far out there.
Yeah. I was 16. I don't know what business I thought I had. And there was no internet to research it on. Like, I don't know what business I thought I had. I think I was, like, existing in this world. Like, I didn't know the internet would ever be a thing. So I was like, it's okay, because no one will be able to look it up.
Right.
Yeah.
that really holds up.
Yeah. All right, well, thanks for coming on again. For all of you, we'll be here again next week at 4:30 Newfoundland time or online at chmr.ca. Please tune in and we'll talk more about writing culture in Newfoundland.